Well, hi and welcome to episode 4 of Newb Eden. Hey, there are 3 common questions that new players often ask when they start EVE Online. What do I do now is a great question. What skills should I train and how should I be making my ISK? Now, they're all great questions. Now, ISK, of course, being EVE's in-game currency. It's your money. It's the things you use to buy things with. So, unfortunately, it's just not possible for me to give you a clear answer to these questions. I mean, the best I can come up with is this. It depends. Part of EVE's beauty is its sandbox nature, and that means there's no clear progression or there's no clear prompts as to what you should be doing next. The game doesn't direct you in a certain career or gameplay style. What you should be doing next depends entirely on you and what you like to do in a video game, and importantly, how much time you have available to do it. I mean, the skills you should be training will depend upon the activity you've chosen to do within EVE. How do you go about making your ISK? Well, that will depend on what skills you've trained and what you like doing in the game. So in this episode, we're going to try and help you answer the first question. What should I be doing in EVE? Now, there's plenty of options, but we'll just try to give you a broad overview and hope that something will resonate with you, and I'll give you some idea of the direction you want to take in the universe of New Eden. Now, there's plenty of things we won't cover, so don't be that guy that jumps in the comments and says, oh, you didn't mention this, this, and this. I know, there's so much to be done, but I just really want to give it like some of the headlines just to point people in the right direction. Now, I would say, however, that if you're totally new to EVE, it's a good idea to complete all the career agents presented to you at the end of the tutorial, and then work your way through the Sisters of EVE Epic arc, which is available to you via the agency window, because at the end of these, you'll end up with a few free ships and you'll have a reasonably healthy wallet, but importantly, you'll also start to get a feel for what you may want to do after that. Like, if you find the missions and the arc really grindy and boring, then there'll be some parts of EVE that may not be enjoyable for you, so you'll know to direct your attention to something else that will engage you, because ultimately, if you're not having fun, you won't play. Now, luckily, EVE has a vast array of options when it comes to what career you choose as a capsuleer in New Eden, so let's have a look at some of those. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to break your options down into 3 main categories. PvP, which is player versus player, PvE, which is player versus environment, and other activities. Now, I've said that 3 categories, but I'm basically about to override it because I'm going to give you this important caveat, which if you can grasp, it's going to make your life a lot less frustrating. Everything you do in EVE is essentially PvP, so these other things happen within a framework of overarching PvP. Now remember, in EVE, you live in a universe that's hosted on a single shard server. So every player has access to every solar system and wormhole, so there's essentially nowhere to hide. So if a player or a group of players decides they want to reach out and touch your gameplay or the things you've built, there is essentially nothing to stop them. And that's especially relevant in the context of this video because new players often just aren't aware how much of these 3 areas, PvP, PvE, and other activities, all seem to overlap and they sometimes blur into each other. So before we go any further, I need you to know this important principle of EVE. In terms of PvP, this is critical. By undocking your ship, you essentially agree to PvP, be it consensual or non-consensual. In fact, I would go one step further and say you don't even have to undock. Simply logging into the game means you are subject to the actions of other players and how their decisions influence the life you're trying to build in this amazing universe. So with that in mind, let's look at a list of actual things you could be doing, and I'll try to point out some of these overlaps and these external influences as we go along. Let's start with PvP. So if you're into combat and you just like to see things explode, then this is the career path for you. Now, it's totally possible to live your life as a solo PvP pilot. It is, however, probably the most difficult thing to do in EVE. You'll come up against other very highly skilled and experienced pilots, as well as trying to avoid being blobbed by larger groups. So as a solo PvP pilot, you will die a lot and it can be very expensive. So it's not really a viable option for most new players because success relies on having trained many specialized skills to level 5 just to get that few extra percent that can give you the edge over your opponents. So for bloodthirsty newcomers, a small gang PvP can actually be a much better place to learn the trade while you develop the skills you need for solo success. There are heaps of corporations within EVE that will give you the experience in flying in fleets of maybe 2 to 10 pilots And in terms of finding those corps, YouTuber Jurious Doctor has a great video on finding corps, so I'm going to link that in the description. So if you're interested in solo or small gang PvP, then you are going to have to train the skills that will allow you to fly those combat ships successfully. So for the first few weeks, it's not going to be particularly sexy, because you'll need to get out of the way some of the core skills that really allow you to maximize things like your power grid, your CPU, and your capacitor management. I mean, the temptation is there to try and just quickly get the skills up to fly as many different ships as possible, but it's not the best way. Now, most corps will actually have what they call doctrines. They're specific compositions of ships and fits that they regularly fly. So talk to your small gang corp, find out what doctrine ships you can get into early on, and set up your training skills towards being effective in those ships. Now, you can move up in scale. You can start to then fly in some medium-sized fleets. By the way, it's not a progression. You don't have to go small gang then medium. You can go straight into medium-sized fleets, but it's just a different type of flying. So 50 to 60 pilots, you can join corps that even run like large fleets, sometimes of hundreds of players. But once again, these corps will have doctrines, and they'll have often dedicated training plans that you can access to make sure you're not wasting your precious skill training time and your skill points. Now, there's no right or wrong way to do this, but there are a couple of pros and cons for each of these that I thought I might just quickly touch on. So solo and small gang really is generally seen as being more skill intensive. We're talking here about real world skill, by the way, not skill points, because you'll often need to make independent decisions, and you'll have to have a good or a growing understanding of the grid, the ships, and the tactics. Because in larger fleets, it can be less of an issue, because you have fleet commanders, also known as FCs, and they will usually direct the strategic overview, and you simply need to follow instructions and just keep your ship maybe anchored to a designated pilot to make sure you're in the right place. Now, one isn't necessarily better than the other, just depends on what you feel comfortable doing. Another factor to consider is the time you have available for gameplay. So smaller groups can often be more flexible in this regard. You might only have an hour spare, so great, grab a corp mate or three and head off for a quick roam. Whereas larger fleets will often form around larger strategic objectives that have like time-based constraints as to when they must happen. So, you might be told, hey, this timer is coming out at this time. We need 200 guys right at this time. So you don't have that flexibility. Sometimes those fleets might be 5 or 6 hours because some of those objectives can take a long time to complete, particularly if there is a lot at stake. So they're just different. Your time frame, your lifestyle may suit one more than the other. What about making ISK and acquiring ships? Well, solo and small gang pilots will die a lot, and often in very expensive ships. So because of this, many of them will actually have other income streams with alternate characters doing PvE, and other activities to fund their PvP habit. You can, however, offset some of the costs by looting the wrecks of ships that you kill. Like when a ship explodes, there's actually a 50-50 chance for each module and every item in the cargo, 50% chance of it either being destroyed or dropping as loot that you can gather. I'm also going to mention factional warfare here, which we'll discuss more detail in a later video. Now, despite some negative press in recent times, I think it's still a viable way for new players to get some solo, small gang combat experience and make some decent ISK while they do it. Because in factional warfare, you can earn faction loyalty points for capturing combat plexes. So you can trade those loyalty points in for items, and those items you can then sell on the market. So it's really quite possible for very new players to make 20 or 30 million ISK an hour if they do it correctly. It's definitely something to consider, so watch out for that upcoming episode on faction warfare. Finally, I should also mention ganking as a genuine PvP option. Now, there's numerous forms of ganking, but most commonly it involves non-consensual PvP in high security space. So you will have a pilot just doing their own thing, maybe they're mining or hauling, and then they can be attacked by groups of gankers whose aim is to kill you quickly before they in turn are killed by Concord, which is essentially EVE's AI security force. Now, gankers will use high damage, low cost ships, and they're going to work on the premise that they loot they get from your wreck will outweigh the cost of the ships that they've lost in the process. Let's move on to PvE, player versus environment. So essentially, you'll be fighting against computer AI characters during PvE. We call them NPCs, which stands for non-player characters. And there's a whole wide array of different NPCs you can fight in EVE. I don't have time to go into detail in this video, so we're just going to fly through a list of the options, and I'll put some links in the description to other YouTubers who can give you more detail. However, harking back to our most important principle, just because you're doing PvE, you are not immune from PvP. Remember, your PvE activities happen in the same space that is being used and traveled by PvPers, and as such, there's absolutely nothing to stop them from attacking you whilst you're doing your PvE. So there's three main types of PvE that are accessible to new players: missions, ratting, and abyssal space. So let's quickly talk about agent missions. If you did the tutorial, it ended up dropping you at a station with a number of career mission agents. They will give you rewards for completing tasks. This is essentially how all missions work in the game. Mission agents offer you tasks that range in difficulty from level 1 to level 5, and with increased difficulty, you get increased reward as you go up the scale. Mission agents can be found in all different types of space, high, low, and nullsec, not in wormholes. And to access the different types of agents, you'll need to have standing with them, which you can accrue by doing the epic arcs. Now, there's plenty of YouTube resources for those wanting to know more about how to make a living doing missions, so I'll put some links in the description. Ratting, however, it's a term used to describe killing NPC pirates for bounty payments. These bounty payments get paid out every 20 minutes, so essentially you're going to earn income by killing as many rats as you can, as well as potentially hoping for some rare NPCs that appear that you can loot their wrecks in the hope that they will drop something valuable. So most ratting will occur in what we call combat anomalies, and they appear in your probe scanner window. You can also find them in all areas of space, including wormholes. You can also find rats in asteroid belts. So if you right click in space, you'll see a list of asteroid belts that are in the system you're in. You can warp to them and hunt for NPC rats to kill there. Finally, abyssal space. It's a more recent addition to the game than missions and ratting, and it has one significant and major difference. During missions and whilst ratting, your PvE activity can be instantly turned into a PvP encounter at any moment, because anyone can find you and choose to attack you. Abyssals, however, actually take you from normal space and jump you into an instanced PvE encounter for up to 20 minutes, and during that time, you are safe from any PvP intervention, and you can focus solely on completing the abyssal PvE activity. They involve 3 rooms with rats to kill and loot to collect, and they range in difficulty from level 0 up to level 6. Now, like all EVE PvE activities, the higher levels give you greater ISK returns, but they're harder to complete and they require more expensive ships. You access abyssal space by activating a filament, which jumps you into the abyssal pocket. Now, they can be completed solo in cruisers. You can do them in pairs with someone else in destroyers, or you could get 3 frigates together in a small fleet to complete an abyssal site. So what's the PvP element? Well, when you enter an abyssal pocket, you leave behind what they call an abyssal trace. This is a scannable signature that means others can locate the exact position you've entered the abyssal pocket, and knowing that at some point within the next 20 minutes, your ship will appear that is potentially chock full of loot from a successful abyssal run. So you run that PvP risk that you expose yourself to being ganked or killed when you come out of that abyssal pocket. Alright, so there's so much more to PvE that's just beyond the scope of the new player intro. You can get involved in incursions, combat sites, burner missions, Triglavian conduits, escalations, and more. But for now, new players can instantly start earning some income through agent missions, ratting, and abyssals. Right, finally, let's wrap up by looking at some of the activities new players can engage in that don't really neatly fit under the headings of PvP or PvE. Once again, there's a lot of them, so we'll just touch on the main ones, as we're really just trying to give you an overview, I guess, of where you may want to head as a new player. Now, you can jump into your inexpensive venture, undock, go and find something to mine, and whatever you mine, you can sell on the market. You can go and mine asteroids for their ore, you can pull ice out of ice belts, or dive into a wormhole and find some gas clouds to mine. Now, you can sell the raw ore, or you could refine them into minerals that you then sell on the market. And if you love mining, you can train into more specialized and efficient mining ships and find more lucrative yet more dangerous places to mine. But you don't have to sell your ore and your minerals. You can choose to get involved in industry. Every ship you see other capsuleers flying in EVE has been constructed at some point from those very minerals that someone has pulled out of an asteroid belt somewhere. So basic industry in EVE is really easy to get started in. You simply need a blueprint, the required materials for that blueprint, and find a station that has some manufacturing services, and you can be building your own ships. If you like it, then like all things in EVE, you can train skills that will make your industry more efficient open up other areas that are more technical, such as research and Tech 2 invention. Now, all of these minerals, parts and constructed ships need to be transported around the solar system. So getting your goods to and from market hubs or moving purchased items out into the far reaches of the solar system just doesn't happen. It requires the skills and expertise of dedicated haulers and freighters who make up an important part of the EVE ecosystem. Now, you may choose to train into this career, either to assist you with moving your own stuff around, or as a career where you get paid by others for your expertise in moving items safely. And here's part of the beauty of EVE. On the surface, hauling may sound boring, moving people's stuff around. But as someone who has a character who's currently employed by one of the main hauling corps in EVE, I can assure you it's anything but boring. I mean, you can get paid very handsomely for moving billions worth of someone else's stuff around. But remember, the whole time you are a prime target for pirates. So the covert nature of planning for safe hauling can be very challenging, exhilarating, and very financially rewarding. Now, most solar systems in EVE also contain hidden data and relic sites that can be very valuable loot. So as an explorer, your career will see you train skills that will allow you to scan down these sites with scanner probes. And once you find them, there's a small hacking mini game that gives you access to the content of these caches. And like all things in EVE, the more you're willing to risk by heading into dangerous parts of space to explore for these sites, the more likely you are to find valuable loot. So training up your skills will allow you to scan down smaller signatures, give you a better chance of winning the minigame, but you'll also need some good combat skills, because an exploration ship potentially carrying a valuable haul of loot is a very attractive target for a bloodthirsty PvPer. Now, nearly all of these items that have been mined, built or found have a use in EVE, and someone wants to buy them as items for their specific gameplay. So as a result, market hubs have emerged in EVE where players buy and sell items. Now, the largest and most famous of these hubs is the high-sec system of Jita. Market hubs provide a central point where there's like a critical mass of buyers and sellers to ensure competitive pricing, well-stocked markets. So for some EVE players, this is the thing they love to do. Understanding, taking advantage of the supply and demand fluctuations can be a really satisfying challenge that also provides a very healthy income stream. So it's possible, and it's not uncommon even for some players who never undock at all. They play their EVE solely inside of a market hub. Now, there are skills you can train that will maximize your market trading ability and efficiency. They'll give you a competitive edge over the next person who's trying to do the same thing. So it's here that the PvP aspect of market trading can be seen, because even without undocking, players can be engaged in competitive struggles to outdo each other, either through legitimate market trading or via the very shady business of market scams. So that's it for our brief overview. I mean, there's so many more subsets to these areas that we can touch on, and then hopefully over the coming months we can take some time to look at them in more detail in future episodes. But for now, my goal was just to get the new EVE pilot thinking about what is possible and what you feel you might engage you in this vast universe, because ultimately it's impossible to do everything EVE has to offer simultaneously. Over time, many players drift in and out of different gameplay options. So remember, you're never locked into something. So find something you enjoy doing, and if for some reason you stop enjoying it, then move on to something else. Next episode, we'll take a look at some of the career options we've discussed, and we'll help point you towards some of the skills you should be training to be successful on that particular path. So that's all for now, guys. Good job. Well done.